I would like to invite Dr. Eliot Forbes to the podium. This is my third time introducing Dr. Forbes, who I know we've already mentioned, but he does win the award for Most Traveled to Aftercare Conferences Award. Dr. Forbes is the CEO of Racing Queensland, the state racing authority for thoroughbred, harness, and greyhound racing, and serves as chairman of Racing Australia's National Retirement of Racehorses Committee. Eliot's knowledge and experience in the animal welfare world has made him a vital member of the IFAR Steering Committee. Please welcome Dr. Eliot Forbes.
Thanks very much, Katie. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Alan, that was a fascinating idea. And thinking back to our time in Newmarket a few years ago, it all started with ideas, and the momentum that's built to the forum that we have today is certainly very gratifying. Racing runs deep in the veins of Australians, with 78,000 individuals having a stake in a racehorse last year, and over $15 billion wagered on our sport. Our champion racehorses, like Winx, become household names, and the Melbourne Cup brings the nation to a stop for 3 minutes on the first Tuesday in November. There are 367 racetracks around our nation, from our metropolitan jewels to our humble country venues that are key to the social fabric of many rural communities. The Australian racing industry last year conducted nearly 20,000 flat races and had a foal crop of 12,000, placing it as the second largest racing industry in the world after the US. There are 375 race clubs across the nation dispensing nearly $500 million in prize money each year. Yet despite our size and our traditional place in Australian society, we are ever mindful that our future rests on ensuring that our industry practices are aligned with community expectations. Dramatic events in the wider racing industry in Australia brought a sharp focus to our responsibility to ensure that the welfare of our racing animals is a central focus. Otherwise, our social licence to operate is at risk. In February 2015, an investigative current affairs program aired an explosive program exposing cruel practices in the greyhound racing industry. Footage was captured by hidden cameras installed illegally by a show called Four Corners. They specifically targeted the greyhound racing industry and represented themselves as crusaders where the official racing regulatory bodies had failed. It created community outrage. The industry's reputation was damaged, sponsors boycotted, and governments intervened. The state government intervention resulted in the dismissal of the boards and the management teams of greyhound racing administrations across those affected states and led to parliamentary inquiries in other states. And then, on the 7th of July 2016, the New South Wales government made the unprecedented decision to shut down the entire greyhound racing industry in that state. In a bitterly fought campaign, that decision was eventually overturned and the industry was allowed to operate, but under strict accountability targets and a changed integrity and administrative model. So to be clear, the greyhound industry does continue in all states in Australia. The Premier at the time, Mike Baird, resigned from office soon after the reversal, but the message to all codes of racing in Australia was clear. Welfare must take centre stage in the management and conduct of racing. Off the back of the New South Wales greyhound decision, equine activist groups already called for parliamentary inquiries into the horse racing industry. Fortunately, this gained no traction, but regardless, due to the diligent work by Racing Australia over previous years, we were well placed to defend the thoroughbred racing industry. To put those views into perspective, it's important to understand the philosophical basis of the animal welfare debate in Australia. At the moderate end of the spectrum, animal welfarists are advocates for strict adherence to humane practices to reduce stress and suffering. Animal protectionists are similar to welfarists but consider some uses of animals to be unacceptable for various reasons. Groups who wish to end horse racing fall in this category. Animal rights advocates believe that animals have fundamental rights and in extreme cases that these rights are equal to humans. They object to humans using animals for any reason, whether that be for food, companionship, transportation or entertainment. The groups such as PETA exist towards this end of the spectrum. Across the entire animal welfare consciousness is the emerging concept of a life worth living. But it is important to keep these views in perspective. Across the community, there is a spectrum of views on animal welfare, from those who are acutely conscious of welfare matters to those who are indifferent or don't care. Mainstream society may not specifically be thinking about animal welfare, but they will be outraged in the face of a specific challenge, such as live baiting and greyhounds. Survey work undertaken by the RSPCA Australia indicates that 8 out of 10 Australians believe that the government should be doing more to strengthen animal outcomes in Australia. Now, we're unlikely to influence the opinions of the extremists. Therefore, our welfare communication strategies need to be targeted on mainstream audiences. It is important to understand that this animal welfare spectrum is dynamic and influenced by a number of key trends. Mainstream society has an endless array of information and messaging reaching out to it each day. Digital and especially social media platforms allow extreme or minority views to have an enhanced ability to reach and influence the mainstream. These groups are trying to shift the mainstream towards their more extreme position on the animal welfare spectrum. This has been achieved in Australia with free-range eggs and an increasing shift away from other forms of intensive animal welfare, production. That is why we simply cannot dismiss the extremists as serial malcontents, but rather as a serious and growing threat to horse racing. Now, we're not necessarily responding to the extremists, but we must continually ensure that our regulatory framework and our racing culture is aligned to community values. One strategy the welfare extremists use is to quote whole of life wastage rates. That is, reporting on horses who leave the industry or die, whether they're foals, horses who don't start their racing career, retired racehorses, and sometimes aged horses at the end of their life. Now, it would be extremely difficult to track and characterise such a data set, and as such figures cannot be relied upon. As such, the term wastage is best avoided as it is non-specific and emotive. Racing Australia has introduced the most significant integrity and animal welfare reforms in modern racing history in respect of full traceability of all horses. Traceability is a cornerstone of integrity and will also underpin the industry's drive on animal welfare standards. The fact that previously significant numbers of unnamed thoroughbreds were not regulated by any authority is unacceptable to prevailing community standards. At Racing Australia, we moved to close this gap and wanted to ensure that we had meaningful and effective oversight of horses throughout the time they participate in the racing industry. We worked with industry participants to clarify and introduce new rules of racing relating to traceability. These new rules ensure that there is traceability of all thoroughbred horses from birth until retirement when they are no longer active in the thoroughbred racing industry. Further, the ownership of all horses will be registered from birth. This is commenced for all foals born from the 1st of August 2016. This will enable authorities to know the location and, if need be, the condition of every thoroughbred, whereas previously a horse only came under the Australian rules of racing at the time of its registration as a racehorse, usually at 2 years of age. This is the first time that a regulatory framework has been extended beyond the racetrack in this non-racing agreement. The new rules of racing require 2 actions for a horse to be accepted into the stud book. Foals must be registered with the stud book through the mare return within 30 days of birth. Each foal's owners must be declared with the registrar within a further 30 days or 60 days from birth. In doing so, owners and breeders agree to be bound by the rules of racing, which relate to welfare, traceability, a complete ban on the use of anabolic steroids, and of course prohibited substances in racehorses. Foal ownership declarations were introduced for the 2016 foal crop. The form must be lodged by the managing owner or his or her authorised agent within 30 days. The forms are currently being keyed into the Racing Australia single national system. The database is designed such that queries by stewards and integrity staff can be formulated and implemented to assist in rapid identification and verification of whereabouts of any registered thoroughbred in Australia. A foal will not be accepted into the stud book unless the foal ownership declaration form is submitted. The declaration forms are emailed to the owners when they submit their mare return, and they're also available online. The manager of the foal must complete it, and each owner must individually complete a foal ownership declaration form. It also provides for the location of the foal. The rule also provides that unless the horse is leaving the property for under 90 days, then they must also notify. So they're allowed to go off-site for veterinary treatment if they're preparing for a sale or if they're for education. But if it's longer than 90 days, they must update the form and advise Racing Australia of the new location of the horse. The requirement for traceability and declaration of ownership greatly strengthens animal welfare and integrity oversight and enforcement. In addition, the stewards will have access to studs and farms for the testing of anabolic adrenergic steroids in young horses, the prohibited substances in racehorses, and to monitor the health and welfare of horses generally. Upon death or retirement, the managing owner is required to also notify Racing Australia, and I'll outline this in more detail in a moment. And in addition, Racing Australia also enforces a compulsory retirement age of 12 years for all thoroughbred horses. The regulatory framework is now structured such that there is oversight of the identity of horses, its owners, its location, throughout the horse's participation in the Australian racing industry. Early life rules, notification of retirement, and the compulsory retirement rules are harmonised to safeguard the integrity of racing and the welfare of horses. The Australian rules of racing require owners and trainers to inform Racing Australia of the date of the retirement of horses and their retirement destination via the retirement and death notification form. This rule came into effect on the 1st of July 2014. The managing owner of each racehorse is responsible for advising the reason for their horse's retirement and their plans for the horse beyond its racing career. They must indicate whether their racehorse was retired due to illness, injury, for breeding, or at their request. They will need to advise whether the horse will be rehomed as an equestrian or a pleasure horse, enter an official retirement program, or be sent to a livestock sale. An important aspect is that we wanted to drive cultural change across the industry, putting the onus on owners to take responsibility for the fate of their horses after racing. It is an offence not to lodge a retirement form. Over the last 2 years, we have received 17,000 total returns. This provides us with a compelling view as to the destination of racehorses at their first exit from racing. In our analysis, we wanted to understand the fate of recently retired horses, and hence we excluded horses greater than 12 years of age and those who had to start more than 12 months ago. This excluded 2,500 returns, leaving us with 15,000 to analyse. The data shows us, at first exit, 68% left racing and began a career as an equestrian or a pleasure horse. 20% entered the breeding industry. 9% were noted as deceased. In total, nearly 9 out of 10 retired horses either entered the equestrian industry or the breeding industry. Now, this is a compelling number who have gone on to a meaningful career after racing and is in sharp contrast to the misinformation that is provided by many welfare activists. I've been challenged on this data a number of times as to its robustness. I can firstly remind you that it is offence under the rules of racing to provide misleading information on an official form. Individual states undertake periodic audits of the sampler forms each year, and to date the audits have proven to be extremely accurate. We do acknowledge that we're probably not capturing every single horse that is retiring, and in fact we may have a skewed sample from those who are more responsible owners. But regardless, I'm able to report on nearly 15,000 data submissions and this is a long way ahead of where we were 2 years ago. We also completed a year-on-year comparison, and the categories were extremely consistent. There was a concern that the first year of data might be skewed towards more responsible owners and that the good results may deteriorate. Pleasingly, this did not eventuate, and the destination of 90% to equestrian and breeding remains consistent over the period. Our database also provides us with powerful insights into the drivers for racehorse retirement. 45% of horses are retired due to injury, 33% are retired at the request of an owner, and 9% of owners made a proactive decision to breed. Collecting and analysing data allows us to form a deep understanding of the owner's motivations for the retirement of horses from racing. Our urbanised society will expect that racing animals will go on to new careers, whether that be in equestrian pursuits, breeding or as companion animals. The data indicates that the equestrian market is large and an important destination for retired thoroughbreds. Retirement is a racing problem, and it's got an equestrian solution. The availability and attractiveness of thoroughbreds in equestrian communities is therefore of paramount importance. Each state of Australia has implemented thoroughbred retirement programs. There are two different approaches in Australia. Retirement programs can be thought of in two dimensions: supply and demand side. Supply side relates to subsidising the supply of horses to the equestrian market. This is where racing authorities either employ or engage retrainers to take horses from the track and retain them for equestrian pursuits. By contrast, demand-side strategies involve stimulating the demand for retrained thoroughbreds in the equestrian market. In New South Wales, the state controlling body has partnered with the correctional services in that state. The program helps prisoners to learn new skills and assists with their rehabilitation. Racing New South Wales runs the program, employs the staff, provides the facilities and eventually sells the horses to the equestrian community. They also have a partnership with another charitable organisation which provides support services for disadvantaged members of the community, such as returning soldiers and the disabled. This year they're planning on expanding their prison program to increase its scope of operations and to work with other prisons. Most Australian states have adopted a demand-driven strategy. This includes Racing Victoria, Racing Queensland, Racing and Wagering Western Australia, Tas Racing and South Australian Thoroughbred Racing. These programs incentivise equestrian participants to choose a retired thoroughbred over another breed and do so by creating awareness and providing additional prize money or other benefits to thoroughbred classes at equestrian events. The demand stimulus approach provides an efficient allocation of financial support and works to stimulate the market forces for equestrian horses. Programs are scalable with a low dollar entry point for controlling bodies and do not necessarily need capital investment for infrastructure. This approach supports the business model of existing retrainers and doesn't put racing authorities in competition with existing retrainers. It also helps to create awareness and understanding of the racing industry amongst the equestrian community. In summing up, the actions of the New South Wales State Government in threatening to close down the greyhound racing industry demonstrates that managing animal welfare is a critical activity. It is important to understand the spectrum of animal welfare activism and how it fits into the wider community views. Society is dynamic, and key trends influence the acceptance of the use of animals and present risks in the terms of the influence that extremists can exert upon the mainstream. We must ensure that our practices align with community expectations and that we communicate effectively to the mainstream about our animal welfare initiatives. This is important so as to mitigate the risk of activists pulling the mainstream towards their extreme end of the spectrum. Racing Australia has harmonised the rules to ensure there is full traceability for each stage of a horse's life in the racing industry, from birth until compulsory retirement. In Australia, our regulatory framework has been a strength which enables us to gather data and to drive culture change across the industry. We believe our new rules requiring the registration of foals, their beneficial owners and their location provides a powerful integrity and transparency tool to assist in the traceability of thoroughbred racehorses throughout their life. Racehorse retirement is a key issue and has been repeatedly targeted by the activists. Our notification of retirement form captures information as to the reasons and destination at the first exit of racing. The rule has been in place for nearly 3 years and provides a deep understanding of the reasons and destinations for horses at their first exit from racing. The underlying data is robust. 90% go to equestrian or breeding at the first exit from racing. Every state also invests in off-the-track programs to raise awareness and improve the equestrian uptake of retired thoroughbreds. However, continued and enhanced investment in off-the-track programs as well as whole-of-life tracking continue to be important. Society is dynamic, and the measures and the strategies we need to implement must constantly evolve. The stakes have never been higher. The responsibilities on the people in this room have never been more important. Fortunately, our network of learning and cooperation provides us with the tools we need to succeed. Thank you for your attention.